Hello, and welcome to this week's Hagley History Hangout. At the Hagley Museum and Library, we document the unfolding history of American business and technology and their impacts on the world. My name is Ben Spohn, and I am the Oral History Program Manager at Hagley. Through this series, we will draw on Hagley's extensive research collections to tell you surprising stories about our past. My talk today, Powder Yards Radio, listening to the Brandywine Oral History Collection, we'll explore the oral history collection of the same name. You might have noticed that for today's show, instead of a PowerPoint, I am just showing you the Oral History Office's website. That's because I would like to highlight some of the most interesting bits of a particular oral history collection, and I would like to show you all how to navigate it so you can hopefully experience the several hundred hours, should you so choose, of content on your own time. So to start, I'll ask you to go to hagley.org/oral history. So what you're staring at right now is the Oral History Office's home page. And as you can see here, each completed oral history collection at Hagley has its own tile here. And if you click on that, you'll navigate directly to the collection in question. But for today, we're focusing on this one. This collection is our largest and oldest collection. From 1954 to 1990, Hagley staff and volunteer conducted 200 interviews with 152 individuals about work and life in the Brandywine Valley. Now, the overwhelming majority of this collection concerns Hagley, the surrounding area, and Wilmington, Delaware. But some do venture up into Chester County, Pennsylvania, and others go into downstate Delaware and even onto the eastern shore of Maryland. So what we're looking at right now is a landing page for the whole collection. And if you just click through it here, you'll see this is just literally everything without alphabetical organization, anything like that, just audio and transcripts. That's what the microphone represents. That's the audio file. And in the event that we do have photographs of our interviewees, as we do with Emily Peoples Blackwell, you'll see their photograph here, and you can click on that and go to their interview. You can also search this entire collection up here in the search bar. So let's say you know the name of a particular interviewee you would like to hear from. You can type that right in here. So I'm going to look up Mary Hazard Collins because I know we have a pretty decent interview with her. Press enter. And there you go. This will bring up her transcript and then her audio. I'm going to show you the audio because the transcript is just a transcript, and quite frankly, it's not very interesting to look at. So this here combines everything that we have pertaining to our interview with this individual. Fortunately, in the case of Mary here, we have a picture of her. We also do have a full transcript, which you'll have to manually enable here, but if you'd rather read than listen to an interview, you can do so. And we also have the interview divided into an index, which is what you're looking at here with the time codes, chapter headings, and keywords. So what you can do is search the interview by keywords, and we've also divided them up in a way that should hopefully be thematic and make listening to them easier. Now, every interview that we have has an index, but not every interview has a transcript. So There we go. That's what an interview looks like. So let's navigate back to the home page for the collection here. Back a couple of steps, I'm afraid. You don't need to know a person's name necessarily. You can search just by topic or a geographical place. So I'm going to look up Moosic. Moosic is a town in northeastern Pennsylvania. It was the site of one of DuPont's black powder mills that wasn't Hagley. So let's see what we find there if we have any oral histories supporting Moosic or featuring Moosic. And we do. Now, if we scroll down here, we can find an interview with somebody who worked at Moosic. That's well and good, but as I'm sure you can imagine, this isn't necessarily the best way to search the collection. It's kind of good for if you know exactly what you're looking for. And we don't always know exactly what we're looking for. So the other great way to look things up is to view the finding aid, which you'll see at this hyperlink here. I already have it open in another window, so I'm just going to go there. Okay, so this is the finding aid. Let's just walk you through what you'll find here. I have to go to the top of the page again so we can start. So here you'll find some information about Hagley, the Hagley employees who put together this finding aid, metadata concerning the collection, like where we actually have the tapes stored at our facility, how big, how long, how much, a historical note explaining the origins of the collection, as well as a scope and content note. This basically is, what a brief summary of what you'll find inside. And obviously, as I'm sure you can guess, for a collection that's a few hundred hours long, this is a really short summary and doesn't necessarily cover everything that we have, but it does cover a lot of it. And then you'll see here on the left a list of names. So you'll notice that sometimes people's names appear a lot more than once. That's not an error. That just means that we have multiple interviews with the person. So like in the case of Edward B. Cheney, he's there twice. That's because Hagley staff and volunteers spoke with him twice. So let's click his name and go see what the finding aid has to say about him. Right, there we are. There he is at the top of the screen. And now, similarly to what we saw at the top of the finding aid with information about the sort of physical tapes, we'll find that here for Mr. Cheney as well, and a brief note that describes his interview more pointedly. And then if you click through here where it says transcript available, boom, there you go. You get the transcript, but then from here you can jump if you'd like to hear some of his audio files related to said transcript. There you go. Easy as that. All right, so before we leave this part of the talk, I'd like to highlight some interesting bits from the collection, just to give you a little bit of an idea of the sort of things that we talk about here, because this collection encapsulates about 120 years of history, give or take. The eldest interviewee was born in the late 1860s, so their early childhood memories are from about 1870, right up until when the last interview was conducted in 1990. But most of the memories herein are of the early 20th century, especially the First World War, which is the clip I'm going to play for you right now. This is from our interview with Helen Edwards, dated March 8th, 1984. She was a woman who came and worked in the powder yards during the First World War. She was actually in the yards making fuses for heavy artillery, which she's going to talk about for us a little bit. And she worked at Hagley during a very exceptional time, because normally women didn't work in the powder yards, but for the extreme demands of the First World War, DuPont made an exception. So here she is talking about how she got to the powder yard at Hagley, an explosion that she witnessed, and helped put out the resulting fire thereof. She was a firefighter in addition to a powder yard worker when needed. And she'll describe her job for us a little bit. And I will scroll along here with the transcript if you would rather read than listen.
And they give us free transportation out to the powder mills.
Where did they pick you up?
DuPont building.
Oh. You had to come into to the DuPont building?
Yeah, we walked in or took the trolley, and if the weather was bad, to 11th and Market. And they took us out there and brought us back, and there was 3 shifts, but I always worked the day shift. And I was out there during explosion. Black powder side.
All right, describe the explosion.
And
that sounds
the
pretty
black
exciting.
powder, there was 4 men killed at that time, and
what year was this?
that was before the armistice, 1918.
So it'd be 1917?
I went out there before 1918, right after the war was declared. And this black powder plant, or packing house it was, that blew up, we thought it was TNT. And they told us never to run towards the water and run into the woods or not towards the water, just so we didn't go towards the water, because they said that was dangerous. And this, when this black powder packing house went up, we run towards that. And we soon changed our tune, went around the other way. And I remember that a big piece of 2x4 was coming towards me as I was running, and I put my arm up, and it hit me on the arm, but it didn't break my arm, but it smashed my watch. And then I happened to look up and saw fire coming down the telephone wires, or electrical wires, I suppose they were. And there was a hose that was outside these little houses that we were in working. We made black powder pellets. And my girlfriend and I grabbed the hose and turned it on the wires. And the men were going around picking up pieces of flesh in buckets. And the men's clothing was up in the tree. And we stayed and helped as much as we could. And then we went over, we had to cross the creek onto a bridge to the ballast side. And then we began to shake.
How did you get across the creek?
The bridge. There was a little bridge across the creek there that went to the other side of the powder plant.
And how did you make these pellets? Did you have any machines?
Yeah, there was across the road there was just a little box, and there was only allowed a gill of powder in each little house at a time. And it was put into a chute in the machine, and the machine compressed it and made a hole through the center for a little fuse to go through. And then when we finished that, we walk across the road again and put that in there and get another gill of powder. And that's all we did all day long. And all the roofs of these houses were on hinges. So if they exploded, they blew off.
How much is a gill? Little bit.
Little bit of thing.
Now this, you had a machine doing the making of the pellets.
Yeah, they
What
compressed.
part did you do with the pellets?
I got the powder and put it in the machine, and then after they were finished, I had a little thing that I put them in and took them across the road again, and then got another gill of powder. And that's all I did all day long.
How much did you get paid?
We made good money, but honest, I can't tell you. I was trying to think of that ever since you called me. I can't remember. Isn't that strange? I know he made awfully good money.
Unfortunately, I don't know how much money Helen made either. But we do know that Helen was born right in 1900. So, for this time that she describes, with her being pressed into service as a firefighter after an explosion at the powder yard, she would have been about 17 to 18 years old, the same age as a high school senior. Well, this is a good encapsulation of what it was like to work in the powder yards during an emergency. I would also like to share what it was like to live near the powder yards during an emergency. Perhaps this is a little bit topical for our time, but we do also have many memories of the 1918 influenza epidemic. And I would like to share this with you, but I will give a little bit of a forewarning. This is admittedly a pretty upsetting little story, but I think it could be interesting or worthwhile to listen to. So, as I did for the previous clip we listened to, I'll go silent and just scroll through the transcript for you.
Go in the back door and
Sorry, I seem to have encountered a little bit of a technical difficulty.
go.
Yes, yeah.
But they went up and dug that little girl's sister, she died of it. And a group of people would be together.
Going to pause the recording for a moment. I'll be back in a second. And we're back for recording. Thank you for bearing with me through that minor glitch. We are now joining Catherine Hackendorn-Sheldrick, where I wanted to join her originally. Content warning still applies. This is a bit of an upsetting story about the impact of the 1918 flu epidemic on the communities surrounding DuPont's powder yards on the Brandywine.
Oh,
Do you remember the flu?
oh yes, I had it. I had it, my father had it, and my sister had it. And just the three of us in our house. But I don't suppose we had it. I can remember being awfully sick, and I can remember, my sister will say, yeah, the worst headache I ever had in my life was when I had the flu. But the schools closed, there were no services at church, any of the churches. The movies were closed, no public places were open, that a group of people would be together, you know what I mean? And I can remember the little girl that was a very great friend of my sister, she died of it. And that was another sad thing. You know, it wasn't all, there were a few thorns among the roses. But I can remember that little girl's father coming over to the lady that loaned me the Palm Beach suit. And she coming into my house, to our house, crying. Her brother was going up to dig his little girl's grave. You couldn't get anybody to dig graves. It was just awful. And my mother said, he's not going to dig his. My brother was about 17. And she sent him up to dig the grave, to go over there among those boys over there, and you pick yourself out a couple of big boys and go up there and dig that grave. He never thought of saying no. Could you do that to a boy now?
They question, well, some would do it.
I guess so.
Yes, yeah.
But they went up and dug that little girl's grave. And there were no services. There were no, she was just simply buried.
People didn't congregate.
No, they stayed, they shun each other.
Could you get a doctor?
Couldn't get a doctor for love nor money. The man next door to us had a friend, a Dr. McCauley was in town. And when we had it, he came out to him. And he told the Dr. McCauley to go into our house. He said, I don't have time. He said, you go in the front door, go in the back door, and see what you can do for them, and go out the front door. And you'll be there in and out while you're walking around. Mm-hmm. And he came in and he gave us some medicine. I can remember he asked my mother for a cup, and he put whatever it was, and he never said what it was, but we took it. It could have been aspirin, it could have been anything. Mm-hmm. But we took it and we got better. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of course, some people didn't get better. Yeah. And they were dying like Father at St. Joseph's was getting calls, couldn't hardly keep up with the telephone calls, on sick calls. Mm-hmm. It was just a horrible, sad, mm-hmm. I don't know a word that would fit it.
It's hard to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, and you couldn't get an undertaker. You couldn't get an undertaker.
What did they do?
Well, I'll tell you what they did. Now, I can remember this. There were a place, and you can see it yet, when you go in the cathedral cemetery, when you're coming out of town, and you come to the cathedral cemetery, from the front gate all the way back, there were a long trench dug, just deep enough, and the caskets were put in one they died. They were just put in one right.
Unfortunately, that interview ends mid-sentence. And it is an admittedly sobering story. This was not Catherine's last interview with Hagley. She actually did interviews, one roughly every other year from 1984 to 1989. And while this is undoubtedly the saddest part of her interview, she does talk about happier things, which for me demonstrates the resiliency of these communities on the Brandywine. She described things like 4th of July celebrations, other holidays, weddings, growing up, and life in general. And I certainly hope that this taste of it will inspire you to listen further. But we have to move on for now. So if listening to each interview as a whole massive file seems like an intimidating undertaking, there's a couple more things that you can do to explore this collection. The first, oh dear, is to browse our digital exhibit, highlighting some of the best, most interesting parts of this collection in the Brandywine Valley Oral History Project website. And I know that right now you're seeing a very long kind of foreboding URL. Don't worry, you won't need to type in that whole thing. You can just type in hagley.org/BVOHP. That's hagley.org/BVOHP. So when you get there, you'll land on our homepage, which contains some of the same information that I've already told you about what exactly this collection is. And then at right, you'll see a number of different subject headings. So if you click on one of these, I picked food and drink because I'm a little bit peckish right now. You'll see a edited, curated selection of clips from oral histories. We thought these were either the best, the most interesting, and the most demonstrative of the full breadth of this collection. Now, unlike the raw interview files from the archive, which is what we were just listening to, these have been cut down. Most are under 2 minutes long, and the audio has been cleaned up a little bit. So if listening to the hiss and hum of analog tape gives you a little bit of a headache, I know it can for me, as I haven't listened to every interview, but I've listened to most of them. Then this might be right up your alley. So let's listen to this clip here now on Jenny Toomey's father making sauerkraut. And as I did before, I'll scroll along with the transcript. So let me open that up for you. And I'll press play.
My father made sauerkraut in our cellar.
Oh, how did he do that, you know?
Well, we had a big tub. Yeah, I helped to do it many a time.
I go back to 1925, so I remember some of these things too. I helped to make the
Could you
sauerkraut.
tell me your name for the tape recorder, please?
I'm Joe Toomey. I'm Jenny Toomey's son.
Thank you.
Well, we got the cabbage. My sister had a garden up the hill, and they grew the cabbage up there. Brought it down the hill and put it in my cellar. My father made it, but all he did was supervise mostly. I had three sisters. We all had to get here that day, and we had this big thing like a cutter a board with a cutter in the middle of it. You know, we put that over a tub. We had to take turns doing it. All he did was pack it in the barrel and salt it.
Great big wooden barrel.
Yeah,
put
great
salt
big.
on it.
Put salt on it, and he had a board he put on top of a big rock.
A wooden top and a great big rock to weigh it down and put pressure upon the cabbage. And let it ferment.
And then when he decided to open it, all the neighbors came and brought their little kettles or buckets or whatever they had. Sent the word out. Grandpa was going to open sauerkraut. And everybody came, got their dish of sauerkraut, a little pot of sauerkraut. He dished it out for everybody, the ones we knew well, you know, right nearby.
How long would it take for it to be ready? Do you know?
I don't know how long, about 6 weeks, I guess he let
A
it
couple
sit.
months, as I recall. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about 6 weeks at least he let it sit, you know, before he dared to touch it. We never dared to touch it. He had to do that himself, my father. He was an old Irishman. He was thick-headed.
I thought that was a really interesting clip. I think if you're local to Wilmington or Newcastle County, you can kind of take it as read that most of the workers at the DuPont powder yards were from an Irish background, or Italian in later years. But why were they making sauerkraut? That doesn't seem like a very Irish type food to me. One of the things that we discovered listening to this collection is that amongst the Irish and Italian workers who made up the majority of the workforce in the Brandywine powder yards, there was also a small pocket of Germans from Alsace-Lorraine who immigrated between roughly 1870 and 1900 and very quickly intermarried with the other established families who were already there and became a part of the powder yards communities. So let's pick another topic and listen to another clip. How about recreation and entertainment? Everybody likes fun. Oh, and pranks. Here's a good one. This is James Kamick describing something called the honey hunt, which was a prank that Brandywine Creek locals, or crickers, would play on unsuspecting newcomers. To me, this prank seems pretty mean-spirited, but I'll let you make that decision yourself.
Hey, Jimmy Comic. Jim, were you on one of those honey hunts?
What'd you say?
Were you with those honey hunts?
We're the ones that put them on.
Yeah?
I'll tell you what happened.
What was your job?
My job was loading the shells, and I'd put powder in them, but put no shot in them. And I give the guys a couple of hands full of shot.
And a couple of drinks now,
and he would stand about 100 feet away from the tree, you know. We took them up, and we had another guy was taking them up. He had a bucket with him in a bag, so the bees wouldn't sting him. And he had a bucket to get the honey in. Well, he would get up the tree, and this guy had this molasses in the thing, and he'd dump it on his head and everything. He said, "Oh, the honey's coming all over me." And then he would light a light to see. And as soon as he did that, there's a guy hiding about 100 or 200 feet away, and he fired the gun, you know. And then there's a guy there with closer with a handful of shot, and you throw through it, and that guy would drop out of the tree. You think he'd get killed? His bucket, he'd drop his bucket, and he would turn the bag, and he'd run about, let him run about 300 or 400 feet, and somebody would all around and catch him. And I'd take him down to the store and try him at time and Dorm would try him. One time he had the big store book upside down trying him. He said, you slick guys from the city comes out here and steal these farmers' honey. And then he finally reads the law to him, and then he puts them in the cell. He said, I'm going to give you a week confinement. And I'll leave the door open a little bit in the cellar, you know. And of course he sees that when he goes in there, he goes out, you know. So they'll let him get out, and they let him get a good start, and they holler at him, they wonder after him. He runs like they're not trying to catch him again, you know.
Yeah. How old were you when you did that?
Well, I must have been 18, 19.
You're old enough to have better sense.
How many
How old you were?
How many times did you do it?
Well, about every once in a while.
Oh, they run up honey hunts quite a while.
And they'd always bring a guy out from the post, mostly a dumb guy in the post office, you know.
Where you come from down south?
He was something they didn't know anything about. And they was telling how easy money could make, you know. And they'd all be out. That was lined up from Rising Lane to Brex Lane, cars both sides, you know, when they knew that was coming off, everybody wanted to see that. Everybody wanted
That
to
was
see
quite a
that.
spectacle. We had a lot of cops.
And there's one guy, one time that took him in there and they tried him. He was from the post office,
They'd
you know.
always come out there.
He was from the post office, this guy was, you know. And they tried him. Oh, he was in a terrible stew when he went in there. He called up the picture over in Ellsbury and told him about Kevin working for the government. He said, I'll lose my job now. And he was so upset, he put the phone upside down on there. Oh, it was something. Oh,
That's quite a gag.
Oh, we had a time with it.
Let's listen to one more clip. Ella Fitzharris on the DuPont women's baseball team.
Of course, I do remember there was a baseball team of girls, I would say maybe 18, 20, that worked at the experimental station. They had a baseball team. They called the DuPont team. They called them the Bloomer Girls. They wore black sateen bloomers with white tops and white navy sailor ties. They played also in the field back of where Walker's Bank is, those houses.
Now, what teams did they play?
I don't know who, but they always played different teams. I guess it was like
These were
different
other women's
DuPonts.
teams?
Yeah,
Were they pretty good?
Very good. I remember, I think there was two people from, one lived on Brex Lane, and the other lived along the Brandywine. They worked for DuPont and they played, but I think the others were from the city. It was a great team, the Bloomer Girls.
I'm sure that was fun to watch.
It was. That's where we got a lot of points too, you know, watching that.
I'm sure you did, yeah.
And then they'd leave and we'd take over the diamond and we'd play there. So.
Oh. Now, did you have an organized team or just whoever was
Whoever was free that day. And anybody would be pitcher, anybody be catcher, but we always...
I see.
And there would never seem to be any fights. No, everybody seemed to get along good.
When you played baseball, where did you play it?
Along the Brandywine in front of Walker's house, those houses at Walker's Lane, you know, and then up in the field in back of those, where DuPont had they had DuPont Experimental had a regular baseball team. It was called the Lower Yard then, I think, and they called it the DuPont team. But the girls played ball there, so when the girls weren't playing, then we used the diamond. Which was quite nice.
Yes, oh, that would be. Yeah, well, now, when you played down by the Brandywine, what did you use as bases?
Stones.
Oh, did you?
Just mark them off on the road. Then you'd just maybe get in the middle of somebody be up to bat, and one of the wagons would come through. We had to stop.
And what about your baseball bat? Was it homemade or?
No, some of the, I guess, the wealthier people had bats, but I remember at one time we had just a board. We used to,
oh, did you?
You know, sometimes we had a tennis ball too. And you had a board and you hit a tennis ball. You could really make a home run by the time it went over the wall and down by the Brandywine, you know. We never had more than 2 balls at a time. You lost those, you were just, the game was over.
Where did you get your baseballs and bats from?
I don't know, somebody in the neighborhood had them. I think the boys had them. And
now, where could they be purchased?
There used to be a toy store in town, I remember, Bottomley's, and they had
They'd sell things like slate. That's where I got my first made slate at Bottomley's. It was on the corner of 6th and Tatnall. And that was a flexible flyer.
So as you listen to and explore the Brandywine Valley Oral History Collection, you'll come across a lot of strange place names, and sometimes, as was the case with the clip we just listened to, the interviewer will say the name of a store and give an address for it, and that should help you figure out where it is. But what about other names, like some of the village names for the workers' villages that surrounded the DuPont powder yards, like Chicken Alley or Duck Street? Well, we compiled a map. So as you listen to and navigate the oral histories, you can consult this map if you hear a name that seems really strange to you, or if you'd like to know just a little more about where it was, where it came from. Say, for instance, Breck's Mill. And there you go. There's Breck's Mill. Or you've just heard a great story about the 4th of July celebrations and you want to know where Keyes Hill is. There you go again. And lastly, with the collection is what is perhaps our most important page, looking for a relative. This is a list of every person interviewed for the Brandywine Valley Oral History Project. Everybody's name is hyperlinked here. So if you go ahead and click on their name, I'm just going to scroll through here and pick one at random. Let's see. Let's try Faith Betty Latimus. This will take you directly to all of the interview material that we have related to that person. So in this case, it's 2 paper transcripts and 3 interviews. 2 that are 2 parts of one long interview and 1 joint interview she did with someone else. And fortunately, in the case of Faith here, we have a photograph as well, so you can see what she looked like. So finally, before we wrap things up, let's say that you're really, really keen on learning more about the Brandywine Valley Oral History Collection, but you're on the go. You don't have time to sit in front of a computer and explore the oral history collections in the way that I've just shown you. Well, we still have you covered. At the same time, we launched the Brandywine Valley Oral History Project digital exhibit. We did a limited run podcast series called The Millrace. The Millrace came out in 2018 and it stepped back 100 years into the past, covering the transition in work and labor happening at DuPont and at Hagley, as the powder yards, which were already dated by that time, were called into use just one last time to cover for the emergency of World War I, as well as what happened after the war. Now, we don't have time to listen to a whole episode, but I'm going to click on one of them just to show you what it looks like. So I think episode 3, A Community on the Edge, is the choice I'll make. This one is about the community surrounding the powder yards explicitly. So this is where you'll find stories about home life. And if you're curious to learn more about the 1918 flu pandemic, this is the episode to listen to. So you can find the Millrace podcast listed on Stitcher, iTunes, and wherever else you get your podcasts. But one benefit you get coming here to hagley.org/Millrace is you get to see the full credits for each episode. So these are links to all of the oral history interviews that we pulled audio clips from, as well as a link back to the Brandywine Valley Oral History Project, our credits, and if you'd rather read than listen, a full episode script. So as we work through this, you'll see that the bits that are from oral history interviews are all italicized, and then the words from myself and my co-host are all in regular text. So, briefly going back to the podcast homepage, you'll see more supporting information, some more detailed biographies about our main narrators that we used for the podcast. These are all people who were interviewed by Hagley staff and volunteers. As you saw, we don't strictly pull audio from these 4 people, but they are sort of our main characters throughout. So there you have it. That's several different ways you can explore the Brandywine Valley Oral History Collection and curate your own Powder Yards Radio playlist, which I strongly encourage you to do. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening to this edition of the Hagley History Hangout. We release a new episode every other week, and you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Hagley's own resource page, hagley.org/fromhome. Thank you. Bye.